Captain Leela Ward stood at the command deck of Outpost Alpha, her eyes scanning the vast expanse of space. The once proud beacon of humanity's strength now felt like a relic, a crumbling fortress surrounded by the unknown darkness of a hostile galaxy. The Xyrix Empire had already decimated humanity's colonies, leaving Earth as the final desperate bulwark against their unstoppable advance. The chilling silence of space was the only sound that matched the growing tension in her chest. Leela's comm officer, Lieutenant Hannah Oren, broke the silence. "Captain, we've detected a fleet. Orcs warships, at least 3 dozen, heading towards our position. Estimated arrival in 12 hours. Leela's jaw tightened. "Prepare the defenses. Tell the fleet commanders to stand by for immediate deployment. If we're going to survive this, we need to hold them off long enough to learn more about their strategy." A low hum resonated through the station as the ship's turrets powered up. Outpost Alpha was the last of humanity's deep space defenses. Its massive gravitational cannon could potentially deal a devastating blow to the Xyrix fleet, but its range was limited. The weapon's power required a precise shot, a one-time chance to strike at the heart of the enemy before they could retaliate. "Captain, there's something else," Hannah added, her voice unsteady. "A human ship just came out of warp, heading straight for us. It's a salvage vessel. No sign of military markings." Leela narrowed her eyes. "Salvage? Are they a rogue faction or survivors from a distant colony?" Before Hannah could respond, a hologram flickered to life in front of Leela. The figure was a familiar face, one that haunted her every thought since the war began. Admiral Roland Kale, a former friend turned enemy. He had once been a key figure in humanity's last great defense efforts. But when the Xyrix Empire offered him power and vengeance, he betrayed Earth, bringing with him valuable information about humanity's most vulnerable systems. "Captain Ward," the hologram's distorted voice crackled, "I see you're still clinging to your little outpost. It won't be enough. My fleet is already en route, and this time, we will not be stopped." Leela's blood ran cold, but she masked her anger with the calm composure drilled into her over years of combat. "Kale, you've gone too far. We're not backing down. We'll fight until the last breath." The hologram flickered again, and for a split second, Leela thought she saw a flash of regret in Cal's eyes. But it vanished quickly, replaced by cold determination. "You're wrong, Leela," he said, his voice lowering. "This is bigger than you, bigger than Earth. The galaxy is changing, and humanity's time has passed. Join me, and I'll spare your people. You can serve under me, as you once did." Leela shook her head. She had heard enough. "I'd rather die fighting for Earth than live under the rule of traitors like you." The transmission ended, leaving her with only the hum of the ship's engines. Leela turned to face her crew, each one watching her intently, knowing what was at stake. Her officers, veterans of countless battles, stood ready to defend their home. Yet even they could sense the looming dread. The Xyrix Empire was no longer just a force they could resist. It was an unstoppable tide. She addressed them with unwavering resolve. "Prepare for battle. Every weapon we have, every ship we can muster, this is the final line. We hold them here, or humanity falls." The crew nodded in unison, a steely determination igniting in their eyes. They weren't just soldiers. They were the last of humanity's defenders. The silence on the bridge was deafening, each heart beating in rhythm with the ticking clock. Outpost Alpha was ready, but the question remained. Would it be enough to stop the Xyrix Empire's deadly march? As the fleet drew closer, Leela's mind raced. There was a weapon hidden deep in the heart of the station, one that could turn the tide in their favor, but she wasn't sure if it was enough to outmatch that Xyrix's new terrifying power. She would need to make a choice, and soon. If this was their final battle, she had to ensure it was humanity's best chance at survival. Outpost Alpha's countdown to battle had begun. The air on the bridge of Outpost Alpha grew thick with tension as the countdown continued. Lila's eyes flicked across the crew as they worked in synchronized chaos, preparing for the worst. Their resolve was clear, but the fear was palpable. Every report that came in only added weight to her burden. The Xerix fleet was closer now, no more than 8 hours out. "Captain," Hannah called, her voice tight. "I'm receiving an encrypted transmission from Earth Command. It's urgent." Lila's heart skipped. Earth Command had been the lifeblood of humanity's strategy, sending orders and reinforcements in their bid to hold the line. But with the fall of most colonies, that lifeline had been severed. Only a handful of ships remained in orbit around Earth. The transmission she was about to receive could make all the difference, or it could be another blow to humanity's already shattered hope. "Put it through," Lila ordered. The flickering screen on the command deck resolved into the image of Admiral Connor Jackson, the leader of Earth's remaining defense fleet. His face, usually stoic, was drawn and pale, his eyes haunted. "Captain Ward," Jackson said, his voice low. "There's no easy way to say this. We've received intelligence suggesting a leak within the fleet. A high-ranking officer is a mole, working with the Xerix." Lila's stomach twisted into knots. "Who? How do we know this?" "Information is still incomplete," Jackson replied. "But we suspect that one of your own is compromised. They've been feeding the Xerix tactical data on our movements, ship configurations, everything they need to hit us harder." The weight of the revelation crashed down on Lila. A traitor, inside her own crew. She felt a surge of betrayal flood her veins. The enemy was already inside, even before the battle had begun. "Do you have any leads?" Lila asked, her voice steely despite the shock creeping into her chest. "None that are reliable," Jackson said grimly. "But I'm sending you a list of suspects. You need to investigate immediately. The Xerix will be upon you soon, and if they've infiltrated your ranks, we're all dead." Lila's gaze hardened. "Understood. I'll handle it personally." As the transmission ended, the sense of urgency on the bridge escalated. Her crew was no longer just preparing for battle. They were now on the hunt for a traitor. Lila's thoughts raced. Who could it be? And why now? She had trusted every officer here, but trust didn't matter when betrayal lurked in the shadows. The crew was already on edge from the looming threat of the Xerix fleet, and now the added complication of an insider made everything more fragile. Lila couldn't afford mistakes, not when Earth's last hope rested on their shoulders. "Lieutenant Orin," Lila called, her voice unwavering. "I need you to scan the list from Earth Command. Track any communication that seems out of the ordinary, anything that could have been sent to the Xerix." "I'm on it, Captain," Hannah replied, her hands flying across the console. Lila took a breath, forcing herself to stay focused. She turned to the rest of her officers. "I'm conducting a crew-wide debrief. Everyone needs to be on high alert. Trust no one, and watch each other's backs. The traitor is among us, and we'll find them before they can do any more damage." As the crew dispersed to their stations, Lila's mind wandered to the recent briefing with the Admiral. The mole had already passed critical information to the enemy. The Xerix fleet's movements, their attack patterns, it all made sense now. The early ambush that had caught them off guard. The sudden, unexplainable maneuvers that seemed to predict their every move. It wasn't just bad luck, it was sabotage. "Captain," Hannah interrupted her thoughts. "We've found something. A message sent from the communications officer's terminal. It's flagged as unusual." Lila's pulse quickened. "Is it encrypted?" "Not exactly," Hannah replied. "But the signature matches the Xerix's known encryption method." Lila's blood ran cold. Damn it. Without another word, she stormed toward the communications officer's station. Officer Garrett Roan, a veteran who had served alongside her for years, sat there, oblivious to the imminent danger. His fingers paused midair as Lila approached. "Garrett," Lila said, her voice laced with controlled fury. "I need to speak with you. Now." His eyes widened, confusion flashing across his face. but there was something in the way he didn't meet her gaze, something that set Lila's instincts ablaze. The traitor was close, and she had no idea just how far the rot had spread. The countdown to battle wasn't the only thing ticking down anymore. Time was running out to uncover the enemy within. The interrogation room was cold, and the hum of the ventilation system was the only sound breaking the suffocating silence. Lila stood in front of Garrett Roan, her face a mask of controlled anger. She had no doubt that he was the traitor. The evidence was clear, but what haunted her was the idea that someone so close to her, someone who had fought side by side with her in countless battles, had turned against them. "Garrett," Lila said, her voice low but firm, "I want the truth. Now." Garrett's eyes flicked to the door, to the lone guard standing just outside, before he looked back at her. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, his posture stiff. He had been caught, but there was still a cold, defiant edge to him. "I don't know what you're talking about," Garrett replied, his voice flat. Lila didn't flinch. "Don't play games with me. You sent information to the Orcs. You've compromised Earth's final defense." Garrett's expression faltered for a moment, but only for a heartbeat. Then he straightened, his gaze meeting hers with a surprising intensity. "I did it because it was the only way to survive. The Orcs aren't like the others. You can't beat them. I've seen what they can do." Lila's stomach twisted, but she held her ground. "And you thought betraying your own people would save you." "It's not about saving me," Garrett snapped, his voice growing desperate. "It's about saving us. The Orcs, they promised us a place in the New Order. I thought we could negotiate a peace." Lila shook her head, her heart sinking. She had known Garrett as a man of honor, a soldier who fought for Earth with the same tenacity as she did. But now, hearing the words come out of his mouth, she realized just how deep the fear had taken root in him. Fear that had driven him to make a choice that would damn them all. "You're a fool," she said softly. "The Orcs don't make deals. They destroy. They'll burn everything we are, everything we'd fought for." For a long moment, Garrett didn't respond. Then his shoulders slumped, the weight of his decisions crashing down on him. "I thought I could make a difference. I thought I could stop the war without all this bloodshed. But I was wrong." Lila felt a pang of pity for him, but it quickly faded. There was no room for mercy now. The traitor had to be dealt with, or the entire mission would be compromised. "You're done here, Garrett. The Orcs won't give you anything but death." "Maybe," Garrett whispered, his voice barely audible. "But I didn't want this. I didn't want any of this." Lila turned and left the room without another word. There was no more time for sentiment. She had to make the hard choices now. As she exited, she found Lieutenant Orin waiting for her, her face grim. "Captain, we've got bigger problems." Lila's stomach tightened. "What now?" "We've received a transmission from the Calarian fleet," Hannah said, her tone clipped. "They've agreed to join our fight. But there's a catch. They want our promise that we'll share the weapon hidden inside Outpost Alpha, the one that can turn the tide against the Orcs. They think they deserve a share of the power." Lila's thoughts raced. The Calarian were powerful, their fleet capable of turning the tide in any battle. But they were also known for their cunning and ruthlessness. Their offer might seem like an opportunity, but it was a dangerous gamble. "Send them the message," Lila said, her voice decisive. "Tell them we'll meet their terms. But make it clear, they either help us win this war, or they're on their own." Hannah nodded. "Understood, Captain." As Lila made her way back to the command center, her mind was already shifting from the betrayal to the bigger picture. The Orcs were moments away from arriving, and the Calarian alliance, though tentative, might be their only shot at victory. But Lila knew that trusting the Calarian could be just as dangerous as trusting a traitor. There were no easy choices anymore. The countdown to the final battle continued, and with it, the weight of humanity's survival pressed heavily on Lila's shoulders. She had led them this far, but now In the face of impossible odds, she needed to make choices that could either save or destroy them all. As the first ships of the Calarian fleet came into view on the horizon, Leela realized that she was no longer just fighting for Earth. She was fighting for the future of the entire galaxy. The Calarian fleet loomed in the distance, their dark ships cutting through the void like shadows. They had arrived, silent, menacing, and untrustworthy in the eyes of many. Layla stood at the command deck, her eyes fixed on the screens that displayed the incoming fleet. The Calarian had kept their word. So far, their arrival signified a fragile alliance, one that could tip the scales in the fight against the Exarchs, but also one that could betray them in the end. Trust was a luxury they no longer had. "Captain," Hannah called, her voice tight. "We've received confirmation. The Calarian fleet is in position. They're ready to engage." Leela nodded, but the pit in her stomach remained. "What's the status of our defenses?" "We're at full capacity," Hannah replied. "Outpost Alpha's gravitational cannon is online, but the range is limited. We'll only get one shot before the Exarch's fleet is upon us." One shot! The weight of that statement hung heavy in the air. If they missed, there would be no second chance. The Exarchs would overwhelm them, and humanity's last line of defense would be gone. Layla clenched her fists, feeling the pressure mount. There were no easy answers, no guarantees. "Launch the drones," Leela ordered, her voice cold. "We need eyes on the Exarch's fleet. Get us as much intel as possible." "Yes, Captain," Hannah said, her fingers flying across the console. Drones launched. As the drones sped toward the enemy, Leela turned her attention back to the Calarian fleet. Their ships were sleek, with angular designs that seemed to mock the human vessels that surrounded them. The Calarian had made no secret of their superior technology, but Layla was no fool. She knew better than to trust anyone without a solid reason. The Calarian were mercenaries at heart. They would take what they could get, and if Earth's survival meant striking a deal, so be it. She had made her promise, but she wouldn't forget it. The bridge grew quieter as they waited for the drones to return with intel. Lila could feel the seconds ticking by like a countdown to certain death. The Exarchs were closing in, and every moment they delayed only made their position more precarious. It was a game of timing now, and they were playing for everything. "Captain," Hannah called out, breaking the tense silence. "We've got the data from the drones. That Exarch's fleet is larger than we anticipated. At least 50 warships, heavily armored, with advanced weaponry we've never encountered." Leela's mind raced as she processed the information. They were outnumbered and outgunned. The gravitational cannon would only disable one ship, at best, before the Exarchs retaliated with overwhelming force. But there was no other choice. They had to fight, no matter the odds. "Tell the Calarian fleet to hold their position," Leela said, her voice firm. "We'll launch a full-scale assault with everything we have. If they want their piece of the weapon, they'll earn it." Hannah hesitated for a moment, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "And if they don't follow orders, then we'll fight without them," Leela said coldly. "We won't beg for their help." The command center was filled with the hum of activity as the orders were relayed. The Calarian fleet responded immediately, their ships aligning in a loose formation just behind the human forces. Lila could see them on the radar now, their ships flickering like distant stars. But there was no time for hesitation. The Exarchs were coming, and their battle-hardened ships would arrive within the hour. Leela took a deep breath, her mind focusing on the task ahead. This was it, the final stand. The Calarian were an unpredictable ally, but they had come, and if they held their part of the bargain, humanity might have a chance. "Prepare the fleet for battle," Leela ordered. "We've got one shot at this. Make it count." Her voice carried across the bridge with the force of years of training, of countless battles, of a captain who had never faltered in the face of overwhelming odds. The crew moved swiftly, the energy palpable, the focus unwavering. But Leela couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was still off. The Calarian fleet might follow orders now, but who knew how long that would last? The battle was coming, and in the midst of it, the alliance of necessity could crumble. She could only hope that, when the time came, the Calarian would remain true to their word. The first wave of Xyrix warships appeared on the horizon, their massive forms blotting out the stars. It was now or never. Humanity's final frontier was about to be tested in ways no one could predict. The time for second guesses was over. And then the battle began. The battle erupted in an instant. The vast emptiness of space became a swirling maelstrom of energy and chaos as the first shots rang out. The Xyrix fleet, a massive wave of dark ships, surged forward with terrifying precision. Their weapons fired with deadly accuracy, streaks of energy lighting up the void. In the distance, Outpost Alpha's defensive cannons hummed to life, firing in unison with humanity's remaining warships. But the Xyrix were faster, more coordinated, and their numbers seemed endless. "Captain, we've engaged the enemy," Hannah shouted, her voice sharp with adrenaline. "The Calarian ships are opening fire. They're following the plan, at least for now." Leela's grip tightened around the rail as she watched the display. The Calarian had moved with disciplined efficiency, their ships striking with precision, their weaponry crackling as it slammed into the advancing Xyrix vessels. The humans and the Calarian were working together in perfect harmony, but Leela couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her. The battle had just begun, and there was no way to know how long the Calarian would stay aligned with their cause. Every second counted. "Deploy the drones," Leela ordered, her voice steady despite the storm of activity surrounding her. "We need to monitor their movements and find their weak points." "Aye, Captain," Hannah replied. Leela's eyes shifted to the viewport, where the first wave of Xyrix warships came into focus. They were enormous, their sleek alien designs reflecting the light of distant stars. Their armor was thick, their weapons devastating. Even with humanity's last remaining warships at their side, it was clear that the Xyrix were not to be underestimated. "Shields are holding for now," Hannah reported, "but they won't last long if they keep this up." Leela glanced at her tactical display. The gravitational cannon was charged, but it could only fire once before they would need to recharge it. It was humanity's trump card, but only if they could land a direct hit. "Target their flagship," Leela commanded, her gaze unwavering. "We need to disrupt their command structure. Once that's down, we'll have a chance." "Yes, Captain," Hannah said, already relaying the order to the fleet. The human and Calarian ships began to shift positions, forming a coordinated offensive against the Xyrix flagship. The gravitational cannon hummed as it powered up, ready to unleash its devastating charge. Lila's heart raced as the seconds ticked by. If they missed, they would be sitting ducks, with no backup from Earth and no reinforcements coming. "Target locked," Hannah said, her voice tense. "Firing in 3, 2, 1. The gravitational cannon fired with a brilliant burst of energy. The blast tore through the void, a crackling wave of power that split the darkness like a knife. It raced toward the Xyrix flagship, the air thick with the promise of destruction. But at the last second, a smaller Xyrix vessel darted in front of the flagship, sacrificing itself to absorb the blast. "Damn it," Leela muttered under her breath. They knew we were coming. The Xyrix flagship, now slightly damaged but still operational, unleashed a retaliatory volley that rocked the entire fleet. Shields flared under the barrage, but the human ships were pushed back, the Calarian vessels taking the brunt of the attack. "Shields are failing on the left flank," shouted Lieutenant Orin. "We need to redistribute power." Leela's mind raced, analyzing the data on the screen. The Xyrix were adapting, their tactics growing more sophisticated with every passing minute. But this was far from over. Humanity had come too far, and she wouldn't let it end in defeat. "Not now. Hold your ground," Leela barked, rallying her crew. "We can't give them an inch. Focus all fire on their flagship. We have to finish what we started." As her crew scrambled to carry out her orders, Lila's mind shifted again to the Calarian. The alliance was fragile, and it was clear that the Exarics were doing everything in their power to exploit any cracks between their forces. If the Calarian wavered, this entire operation would collapse. "Captain, incoming transmission," Hannah said, her voice tight. "It's from the Calarian flagship." Leela's heart skipped a beat. She knew this wasn't a good sign. "Put it through." The image of Admiral Kara, the Calarian leader, appeared on the screen. His face was a mask of cold determination, but there was something in his eyes, something calculating. "Captain Ward," Kara said smoothly, "I must inform you that we've reassessed the situation. As per our agreement, we are entitled to a share of the weapons stored within your outpost. We expect immediate access to it once this battle concludes." Leela's stomach twisted. "You promised us your support in exchange for that weapon, and I gave you my word. But if you're trying to renegotiate under fire—" "We are not renegotiating, Captain," Kara interrupted, his tone icy. "We are simply reminding you of the terms of our alliance." Leela's blood ran cold. The Calarian had waited until the heat of battle to make their move. They were already calculating the next phase, their own survival paramount above all else. This was no longer an alliance. It was a ticking time bomb. Leela's grip on the console tightened, the muscles in her jaw clenching as Kara's words echoed in her mind. The Calarian had revealed their true intentions at the worst possible moment. The battle was raging around them, but now she was faced with the harsh reality that their supposed allies might not be as loyal as they had believed. The weight of that knowledge hit her like a blow to the chest. "We need to stay focused, Captain," Hannah said, her voice a calming force amidst the storm. "The Exarix fleet is closing in. If we don't move now, we'll lose our chance." Leela shot a look at her tactical display. The Exarix flagship had taken heavy damage, but it was still fighting back with lethal precision. Their forces were holding, but only just. The gravitational cannon had failed to deal the decisive blow, and now they were on the back foot. "I know," Leela muttered, her mind still spinning. The Calarian threat was real. If they turned on them now, if they backed out of the fight for the weapon, it would be catastrophic. But they couldn't afford to let that distraction break their focus. The Exarics were still the immediate danger, and Earth's last stand depended on defeating them. "Lieutenant Orin, coordinate with the Calarian fleet," Leela said, her voice hard with resolve. "Tell them to hold their fire unless we give the order. If they pull any more tricks, we'll consider them a threat. Understand?" "Aye, Captain," Orin replied. There was no hesitation in his voice. He knew what was at stake. As Orin relayed the message, Leela turned her attention back to the battle. The human and Calarian fleets were pushing forward together, but the Exarics were relentless, their ships closing in on Earth's final defense line. The screens flashed red as a warning light blared from the systems monitoring the fleet's status. "Shields at 50%, Hannah reported. "Incoming fire from the left flank." Leela didn't flinch. They had trained for this moment, no matter how dire it seemed. "Deploy the countermeasures," she ordered. "Divert power to the main cannons. We need to strike before they overwhelm us." The massive warships of the Exarics continued to close in. Every ship was a behemoth, bristling with weapons that seemed more like instruments of extinction than tools of war. But Leela's eyes narrowed as a new wave of enemy ships broke through the fray. A sleek, angular silhouette that didn't belong. The Exarics had sent reinforcements. They were preparing for the kill. "Target the reinforcements," Leela commanded. "Give them everything we've got. We can't afford to let them regroup." The human ships, joined by the Calarian fleet, unleashed their weapons in unison, the combined firepower tearing into the Exarix reinforcements. The sky, or rather, the expanse of space, was filled with bursts of energy, the stars flickering as explosions rippled through the darkness. Lila's breath came in quick bursts as she watched the battle unfold, but something gnawed at the back of her mind. There was a certain viciousness in the way the Exarix moved, an almost desperate need to eradicate them completely. Her instincts flared, and she realized the truth. The Exarchs weren't just trying to defeat humanity. They were trying to break them, destroy every last vestige of resistance. This was no ordinary war. It was their final, all-out assault. "Captain," Hannah shouted, her voice strained. "The Calarian fleet. They're breaking formation. They're pulling back." Leela's heart skipped a beat. "What?" "Their ships are leaving the formation, Captain. They're retreating." The Calarian had betrayed them. The alliance was collapsing before her eyes. Leela's mind raced as she calculated their options. The Calarian were abandoning their position, and if they retreated, Earth would be exposed to the full force of the Exarch's assault. The final line of defense was about to collapse. "Activate the emergency protocols," Leela ordered, her voice cold. "We need to get every ship into evasive maneuvers. We're not going down without a fight." Hannah's fingers flew across the console, relaying orders to the fleet. Outpost Alpha's defensive systems came online, the enormous gravitational cannon locking into place. It was their last weapon, their only hope of making the difference in the battle. If they couldn't stop the Exarchs now, all would be lost. "Prepare for a full barrage," Leela said, her voice steady. She wasn't going to let the Calarian's betrayal cost them the war. If the Calarian wouldn't fight for Earth, humanity would fight on their own. And then, as the final wave of Exarch ships entered the firing range, Leela made the decision. Fire. The gravitational cannon erupted with a burst of energy, a rippling wave of destructive force tearing through the void. The Exarch's flagship, along with the closest reinforcements, took the full brunt of the blast, their shields shattering under the immense pressure. The space around them ignited, the stars blotted out by the sheer power of the attack. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the Exarchs retaliated with everything they had. The shockwave of the gravitational cannon's blast rippled through the battlefield, sending a cascade of explosions through the Exarchs' lines. For a moment, it felt like victory was within reach, until the retaliatory fire from the remaining Exarch ships slammed into humanity's defenses with brutal force. Leela's heart raced as she watched the screens flicker with warnings. The blast had caused catastrophic damage to the Exarch's flagship and its reinforcements, but the remaining enemy fleet was undeterred. The Exarchs were an unstoppable force, their ships hammering Earth's fleet with wave after wave of relentless attacks. Shields failing on the port side. Hannah yelled, her voice tight with urgency. "If we don't get those reinforcements in here, we're done for." Leela felt the pressure building. The Calarian fleet was nowhere to be seen, their betrayal clear as day. The once hopeful alliance had turned into a nightmare of isolation. Humanity was alone, facing an enemy bent on their annihilation. "Status on the rest of the fleet?" Leela asked, her voice sharp and calm despite the chaos surrounding her. "The Calarian ships have pulled back completely," Orin reported, his eyes glued to the tactical display. "We're facing the full force of the Exarchs with no backup." Leela's mind raced. The Calarian had abandoned them, but they still had a few cards left to play. The Outpost's weapons, everything they had, would be all they could rely on. Outpost Alpha was Earth's last hope. "Relay a priority message to all ships," Leela commanded. "All remaining firepower to the center mass of the Exarch's formation. We're not just going to survive. We're going to make them regret underestimating humanity." Hannah hesitated for a moment but quickly complied. The tension in the air was palpable. The Exarch ships were closing in, their weapons flashing with deadly precision. Lila could see the trail of destruction left behind by their firepower, as human warships were torn apart one by one. The situation was dire. "Captain," Hannah said, her voice strained, "the Outpost's main reactor is at critical levels. We can't sustain these defenses much longer." Leela's jaw clenched. Outpost Alpha was a fortress, a marvel of human engineering, but it was designed to defend against a single attack, not the full might of an entire Xyrix fleet. They were pushing the station to its limits, and if the reactor went critical, it could explode, taking everything with it. Not yet, Layla growled. Hold the line. We can't let them take the outpost. She scanned the battlefield once again, her mind calculating, moving faster than ever before. The fleet was being overwhelmed, their shields flickering as enemy fire pounded relentlessly. There had to be another way. And then it hit her. Lieutenant Orin, I need you to reroute the station's emergency systems to the central control core, she said, her voice firm. We need to unleash the secondary defenses, lock out the outpost's reactor to prevent a shutdown, and overload the external turrets. We're going to turn this station into a weapon. Orin didn't need to be told twice. Understood, Captain. Leela's fingers danced across the console, and soon, the station's secondary systems were fully engaged. The outer defenses, massive turrets, and automated drone defenses came online, their colossal guns locking onto the Xyrix fleet. The sudden surge of firepower caught the enemy off guard. Massive energy blasts and missiles tore into the Xyrix ships, ripping through their ranks and scattering their formation. But the battle was far from won. Captain, we've got another wave incoming, Hana called. They're adapting to our new tactics. Their flagship is still operational and pulling the others into a new formation. Leela's eyes narrowed as she watched the Xyrix flagship regrouping, its shields regenerating and weapons primed. They were relentless, and this was only the beginning. Their weapons, more advanced and devastating, would still be able to take down anything humanity threw at them. But this was no time to waver. We'll fight until we can't fight anymore, Leela said, her voice unwavering. All ships, focus fire on the flagship. We take down their command, and the rest of the fleet will scatter. The human fleet, though battered and bruised, rallied behind their captain. The energy on the bridge was electric, as every officer and crew member worked together in perfect harmony. The Calarian were gone, but humanity was still standing, still fighting. The gravitational cannon hummed back to life, its immense power charging once more. But this time, it wouldn't be enough on its own. Layla had no illusions. They needed a breakthrough, something to turn the tide before the Xyrix made their final push. Prepare for the last strike, Leela commanded. This is our moment. As her crew moved into position, Layla's heart pounded with determination. They would fight until there was nothing left. Humanity had been pushed to the edge, but they would not break. Earth would stand tall, and the Xyrix would know that they had underestimated humanity's will to survive. The next strike would be their final, unrelenting blow. The tension on the bridge was suffocating. The last remaining human warships had formed a defensive perimeter around Outpost Alpha, their cannons firing relentlessly into the Xyrix fleet. The outpost's secondary turrets were a continuous burst of deadly energy, cutting through the ranks of the enemy with savage precision. The gravitational cannon, now fully recharged, was ready for its final shot. But Leela knew this attack had to be perfectly timed. Every ship was pushing past its limits, every crew member straining to keep the defenses alive. The shields on the human ships flickered dangerously as another volley of Xyrix fire slammed into them. Yet, humanity's resolve remained unshaken. Captain, the flagship is within range, Hannah reported, her voice tight. We have one shot at this. If we miss, we're finished. Leela didn't hesitate. She had seen the destruction the Xyrix had brought to their doorstep, the countless lives lost in this struggle. The lives of her crew, her people, depended on this moment. Failure was not an option. Focus all fire on the flagship, Leela commanded, her voice cold with resolve. Activate the gravity well. Prepare the cannon. This is it. The outpost's weapons aligned, and the hum of the gravitational cannon filled the air. The massive weapon drawing power from the core of Outpost Alpha itself. The Xyrix flagship, a colossal ship brimming with the firepower of an entire fleet, was bearing down on them. Its weapons were primed to obliterate the last remnants of humanity's defense. but they had the advantage of surprise and sheer will. "Target locked," Hannah said, firing in 3, 2, 1. The gravitational cannon fired, its immense power shattering the silence. A blinding wave of energy tore through space, a force that seemed to twist reality itself. The flagship, caught directly in the path of the blast, didn't stand a chance. The ship's shields disintegrated under the pressure, and the core of the Xyrix vessel collapsed in on itself in a fiery explosion. The shockwave sent smaller Xyrix ships scattering, their formations unraveling in the wake of their flagship's destruction. Leela didn't breathe as she watched the explosion. Time seemed to slow. The Xyrix flagship, once an indomitable symbol of their might, was gone in an instant. She knew it wasn't over, but the tides had shifted. The Xyrix were rattled, their command structure shattered. The remaining ships faltered, their attacks losing cohesion as they scrambled to reorganize. "Captain, we've done it," Orin shouted. "The Xyrix are scattering. They're losing their formation." Leela's chest tightened with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The battle wasn't won. Not yet, but the Xyrix had been dealt a crushing blow. Their flagship was destroyed, their fleet in disarray. The fight would continue, but now humanity had the upper hand. "Prepare for the final offensive," Leela said, her voice unwavering despite the toll the battle had taken. "We finish this now." The human fleet surged forward, taking full advantage of the confusion. Their cannons fired in rapid succession, ripping through the remaining Xyrix ships with brutal precision. The Calarian, watching from the distance, held their fire, seemingly content to watch humanity finish what they had started. The last wave of Xyrix ships, once formidable in number and power, crumbled under the relentless assault. One by one, they fell, their weapons firing ineffectually into the void before being overwhelmed. The few remaining vessels tried to flee, but there was no escape. Humanity's resolve had turned the tide, and the Xyrix were on the verge of retreating, broken and defeated. Leela's heart pounded in her chest as she watched that Xyrix fleet scatter. The final push had succeeded. The last frontier had been defended, and humanity had triumphed. "We've won," Hannah whispered, as if unable to fully believe it. "We actually won." Leela closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the weight of victory settle in. The battle had been long, brutal, and costly, but humanity had faced extinction and emerged victorious. They had stood alone against an overwhelming force, and they had fought back with everything they had. Their tenacity, their unity, their spirit, all of it had carried them through. But as the last remnants of that Xyrix fleet retreated into the stars, Leela knew that this was only the beginning. The war was over, but the journey was far from finished. Humanity had shown the galaxy what they were capable of, but there were still countless unknowns out there in the vastness of space. The future would be uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity was not just a species fighting for survival. They were a force to be reckoned with. Outpost Alpha stood tall, a symbol of resistance and resilience. The war had been won, but now the real challenge would begin. Rebuilding, reuniting, and forging a new future for humanity, one where they would never be powerless again. As Leela gazed out into the stars, she knew that Earth's legacy was only just beginning.